Well, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and it's really a particular pleasure to basically probably take the most important of all the topics. Because we know most countries, I speak as a Dane, it's really the private sector that takes the lead in all reconstruction. And that's really why we are here. We want to find out not only what or how we're going to do it in the future, but equally important, what we are already doing to rebuild Ukraine. And I'm happy that we have a very exciting panel to help us with, guide us through that today, bringing us both perspective directly from the private sector, but also some of the key policymakers from the public sector who will shape the business environment that private sector investors in Ukraine will be faced with or are already facing, and will be faced with in the coming years. First, I would like to introduce to you Lucy Cronin, who comes with us, she's the Vice President of EU Public Affairs for Amazon, which is obviously a company that needs no further introduction. I say that as a recent father of small children, where certainly Amazon Prime came in handy. But it's also, of course, a company that does a lot of business services for other companies. It facilitates what other private businesses do. Then we have Andy Hunter, who comes with us as the president of the US AmCham in Ukraine. He represents more than 600 American and international investors and businesses in Ukraine. And then we have from Washington, Dorothy McAuliffe, who is Joe Biden's special representative for global partnerships at the US Department of State, where she is tasked with advancing precisely the kind of public-private partnerships that we want to talk about now. And then last but not least, we have a very special guest with us from Kiev, the recently appointed director of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Mr. Simon Krivonos. Thank you very much for joining us today. And as we already heard, the mayor of Mykolaiv actually said it, private sector investment is always about risk and reward. It's about really mobilizing animal spirits. It's about figuring out the business climate, etc. So what I asked the participants of the panel to do was basically come up with a concrete example, an inspirational idea, something that their businesses are doing, their offices are doing to promote the goal we all want. So we will hear initially from each of the panelists, and then we'll have a moderated discussion, and then I will go and call upon any of you in the audience who would like to have a word as well. So without further ado, we agreed, Lucy, please take it away.
The First Lady first. So thank you, and thanks for welcoming me here today, and in fact, thanks to everybody in this room and on screen that has delivered such tremendous effort over the last 15, 16 months. It's quite a sight to behold. At Amazon, you know, we understand that with size and scale comes responsibility, and certainly that has been our modus operandi when it comes to support for Ukraine. So I just wanted to talk about two things that we've done to date, as requested by our moderator, and we'll get on to recovery and resilience later in the conversation. So since 2020, Amazon has facilitated 350 million euro worth of humanitarian aid across a number of crises across the European continent. But this is, our work in Ukraine has been the longest and largest effort that we as a company have embarked on. So there are two things at Amazon that we do really well. We move digital goods to the cloud, and we move physical objects through our logistics network. So when we approach how we as a private sector actor can lean into humanitarian efforts and crisis response, we try to bear in mind where we think we can bring most value, and that of course is where we know we can do good stuff. So if I think about the moving of digital goods to cloud, within the first 48 hours of the crisis, we, Amazon Web Services, had secured vital government data for most institutions, most state institutions in Ukraine, so government institutions, banking institutions, universities, in order to ensure that those institutions could continue to operate safely and securely. And then the second thing we did within 3 weeks of the crisis starting, we had set up 2 humanitarian hubs, one in Poland and one in Slovakia, which allowed us basically consolidate ship and get to our charity partners millions of critical care goods that were needed in the first instance. And if I just may recognise the role of those charity partners, the private sector can do so much, but it is the charity partners on the ground that are the last mile and really do deliver those goods at the end of the day to those in need. So my hat off to our charity partners, they're fantastic.
Well, thank you very much, Lucy, and thank you also. I can say that personally, having actually purchased drones through your company for delivery to Ukraine. But Andy, you got a wealth of experience. What do you want to share?
Well, I think the message is that Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and business stands united with Ukraine. We see the statistics. 31% of our members have had damage or destruction to their facilities and property. 19% of the members have had at least one employee that's been killed over the last 15 months. Many of the employees are on the front lines. They are defending, they're fighting for freedom. But I think what we've seen, what the business community has been especially inspired by Ukrainians' armed forces, and it's what the business community is doing. The internet in Kyiv works better. The internet works better in wartime Kyiv than it does in many European capitals. And that's thanks to companies like the infrastructure, the IBMs, the Ciscos, the Microsoft, and I think companies like Amazon. The banking sector, it works seamlessly. Thanks to again like Visa, Mastercard, the payment systems. But the fact that Amazon gave the banks the opportunity to move, like we had this analogy about going into the tunnels during the Second World War. Now we're going into the clouds, and that's where the safety is, because the data centers, they were at risk. They were the targets, because the plan was to hit out the banking system, and the country, the economy would be pretty much dead. But that's working. We see companies, those that have been hit, like in Hostomel, Unilever. Hostomel, this was the first days of the war. They had a factory that's been very much destroyed. My favorite factory was the Oreo factory, Mondelez in Trostanets near Sumy. Unfortunately, that's been destroyed. But the Coca-Cola plant in just outside of Kyiv, in Brovary, that was the largest in terms of volume producing Coca-Cola in Europe. And Coca-Cola, they've reopened. They are fully operational now. The Mondelez plant, they are producing milk or chocolate now. They're coming back. And like Unilever, they've just announced a $20 million investment in a brand new factory just outside Kyiv. Nestle already have 3 plants. They have a chocolate plant in Lviv. They have a pot noodle plant in Kharkiv, which is operational. And they have a 3rd plant in Torchin, in northwest Ukraine. And they're investing another 45 million euros in the plant during the war. So I think what we're seeing, we actually did together with McKinsey, quite an interesting, McKinsey wrote this article about the resilience of business in Ukraine. And I think that the global business community really looks at it. What is it like to run a business during the war? And what are the realities? And probably just one final example. I mean, last Friday, I was at an opening of, this is the first American university in Kyiv. And this was a launch and the opening, a private sector investment in a new university in Kyiv during the war. And this was the Friday, this was the week when we had missiles flying over Kyiv. And one particular evening, we had both the cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, we had the kamikaze drones, we had the hypersonic missiles, all being brought down over Kyiv, a really noisy night. And then the next morning, we go to the beautiful, on the river, Dnipro, with the sun shining, the river port, which was actually built under Khrushchev in 1961. And in 2023, during the war, a brand new American university funded by the private sector opens. So the business sector is there, and the big business sector, the private sector is there to stay.
Dorothy,
Yes.
any views from the Office of Global Partnerships? We've already heard a number of examples.
So thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is an incredible gathering, and it's just a real honor to be in the presence of so many great minds who are tackling one of the greatest challenges of our times, our lifetimes, honestly. So from the Office of Global Partnerships, I just want to first state what we do and how we think and how we approach private sector. We are the office at the U.S. State Department that leverages the private sector. So we work and we think of private sector as a broad definition of both civil society, business, academia, and so on. Anything that is not U.S. government, we look to see how we can leverage the resources of the private sector to bring solutions to the foreign policy challenges and national security challenges that we face as a country. One of our highest priorities, of course, is recovery, rebuilding Ukraine, commitment to the fighting the war, full-scale war of invasion by Putin, and bringing the resources, the full resources of the U.S. government to bear, and as well as working with our allies and international partners. And so I can think of, you asked us, the challenge was think of, one idea. An important part of what my colleagues have worked on, and State Department has been the lead on, the energy sector, because we know the energy sector undergirds the complete reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine. We saw great success with, as Putin tried to weaponize winter in Ukraine, we saw great success with public and private sector internationally coming to bear on, being creative around finding solutions to help shore up the energy grid. We know that will be an ongoing source of opportunity and need as Ukraine looks to reconstruction. So I would say thinking together with private sector and public sector together, platforms around the world, that is a huge opportunity for private sector risk and reward as we see the war continues, sadly, and we hope for the day that it ends. We have to, as has been stated many times, continue to think and to work today on reconstruction and rebuilding. And I think the opportunity for the climate ambition and the green rebuilding is certainly in the best interests of the world and in Ukraine, as has been stated, in terms of shifting their reliance, creating their energy security, and the opportunity to build a model for the world on what that kind of transition looks like. I led a delegation to the Western Balkans on energy security and climate ambition. And, the goals are very much the same across the world. How do we look towards a secure energy future and rebuild and divert away from reliance on Russian supply chain in the energy sector? So I think there's great opportunity there. Also, we have many tools. The U.S. government, the DFC has been very active. They have over $800 million now of exposure in terms of debt and equity financing, and as well as political risk insurance. We know as the world needs to come together around building the pool of risk insurance, war insurance, and then also Exim Bank as well, looking for a pipeline of projects. So there are these tools of U.S. government, the private sector. We are looking for pipelines of projects open for business. That's our message. And then looking to these platforms of multilateral cooperation and how the private sector engages with those multilateral opportunities, of course, has been noted, anti-corruption and opportunities to reflect and model best practices for the rest of the world going forward. This is not just a Ukraine issue, right? This is a whole of world issue as we look to democratization and the rise of autocracies in the world. So I think there are lots of incredible opportunities for best practices to come out of what is so necessary for Ukraine and the free world in terms of looking at this rebuilding opportunity. The only last thing I'll say is I think we need to be thinking broadly about sectors. So yes, technology, obviously, agriculture, energy opportunities, But also, we need to be aware of the challenges around, as Dari mentioned last night, 700 NGOs on the ground, and where can the U.S. government, working together with other governments, help leverage and support those efforts locally around mental health, veterans, rebuilding families and public health systems. And I went to a conference on with the National Academy of Sciences in Washington recently, thinking about PhDs that have been interrupted, science and research, all of these sectors that need support and awareness, the cultural heritage piece. So there is no shortage of opportunity and need. And one last thing is that, as Senator Booker mentioned, the United States, the government and people are 100%, 150% behind this effort. And I just want to underscore that so much is at stake for the world in this incredible moment that we're in. And I'm just grateful to be here to have the opportunity to talk with all of you.
Thank you. Now, there's only one person on this panel who probably has a direct hand in the general business climate in Ukraine, and that's you, Mr. Krivonos. So we look very much forward to what you would like to share with us.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to take part in this event. And now I would like to tell you why is NABU role is main in the future reconstruction of Ukraine. Is important. Is not is main and important in the future reconstruction of Ukraine. Our soldiers, our country, all of us fight for a better future. And in this future, corruption has no place. Once Ukraine wins the war, and a lot of international assistance funds and investments will come to Ukraine. So investors must be sure in the protection of their rights and freedoms, and to count on the same rules of game which work in all civilized world. One of the main elements of the fair play is a systematic and efficient fight against corruption. NABU and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor Office SAPO are the leaders of such fight. Our task is to detect and eliminate top corruption. We are the part of anti-corruption infrastructure created with the support of international partners. NABU makes pre-trial investigation in different spheres. It's a judicial system, the land resources, it's a defending industry, and many others. According to the law, NABU has a limited staff, maximum 700 persons, employees. For the efficient monitoring and detection of the corruption risk in the future reconstruction of Ukraine, it is very important to strengthen NABU and SAPO's institutional capacity. That is why we have been working together with the government and parliament of Ukraine on increasing the number of NABU staff. Recently, the draft law was submitted to the parliament, and I do hope that it will be voted soon in full. Increasing the number of NABU's personnel and strengthening the institutional capacity and independence of NABU is one of the requirements of the state anti-corruption program of Ukraine, which has been adopted by the government recently. In parallel, we work with our internal capacity, and we have already optimized administrative staff and business processes to strengthen those units who investigate criminal cases. NABU was established 8 years ago. Since then, we have been gone through a lot of challenges, but with your support, with the support of our international partners and the European Union, our challenges became our opportunities. Together with SAPO, we revealed the biggest scheme in the judiciary. Working undercover, we detained the head of Supreme Court red-handed. The bribe was 2.7 $7 million. This situation is a perfect example which proves that Ukraine has built an independent and autonomous anti-corruption system able to hunt down any top corruption officials. It was mentioning that the NABU pays a lot of attention to international cooperation. More partners you have, the more efficient your investigation is. We use mechanism of mutual legal assistance, knowledge exchange with foreign partners. We appreciate the opportunity to cooperate not only with 27 EU member states, but also with EU institutions. So we invite you to Ukraine, to Kyiv. Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and we are ready for your victory, for our victory and our reconstruction. We have been efficiently fighting with the external enemy with your support, and I believe that with your support we will overcome the internal one. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Very, very, very inspiring words, Mr. Krovanas. I guess before we turn to the audience, I have sort of one general question to private sector as well as the State Department. Namely, isn't there a risk that we're too pessimistic? As I said in the beginning, it's all about risk-reward. And the risks are fairly obvious. We see that on the news every day. But at the same time, there is a lot of reward. I mean, we just heard the Deputy Prime Minister say, well, look, there's a lot of businesses that will leave Russia but still needs to be in the region. We are in a general global environment where companies are looking to reshore or diversify out of China, whatever we used to call it. Ukraine, with the association agreement already in place, has virtually unfettered access, even in agriculture, to the EU market. It has, I think it's fair to say, very competitive wages. And once it has its territory reintegrated, and through the efforts of Mr. Krovanas and his team, have a far better record also on anti-corruption, why wouldn't the private sector come rushing in?
Yeah, it's risky to invest in Ukraine, but it's more risky not to invest in Ukraine now. And I think that's the message that we are trying to deliver, that Ukraine is open for business. And we see real tangible examples. I've been living and working in Ukraine since 1996, the last 27 years. I've seen a lot of good, I've seen bad, I've seen ugly. But I think now this momentum, Ukrainians are united more than ever. I think there's an understanding that now is the time to really rebuild the country. I think Ukraine geopolitically is facing the West, and I think business is also facing the West. I think it's cutting ties, the business ties and the geopolitical ties they had with Russia. I think Russia always wanted to see a corrupt Ukraine because that's the way they did business. And I think now it's really for the private sector, and the private sector is showing the way already. And I believe this is what's going to be. It will be the place to invest. And I think what we need for that, I think our members are showing the two key issues. Firstly, it is the security. So in terms of what will the security guarantees be? Will it be NATO membership, or will it be another sort of some sort of security guarantees? And then secondly, rule of law. I think having the rule of law in place gives the reassurance to the investors that your investment is safe, and it's the place to do business.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we would look at it in terms of, there are a couple of things that we think are very, very important and necessary to the rebuild of Ukraine. I mean, as a private sector actor, obviously a stable regulatory environment is always important, regardless of the territory. So that would be something that we would be obviously looking very closely at in terms of investment in Ukraine or elsewhere. I think there are things like, and it was mentioned in the last panel, sustainability and the green transition. We're the largest corporate buyer of renewable energy globally. We know a little bit about the green transition and how important it is, and how important it is to companies like Amazon when they're making investment decisions. So that is certainly something that we would, like to see across all territories, including Ukraine. But I share your optimism. We have seen, we know that across all countries, SMEs are the backbone of the economy, no matter where you are. They are really the backbone of the economy. And obviously, as Amazon, we work with lots and lots of SMEs. And doggedness of our Ukrainian SME partners is truly impressive. And I think if they are the future and they are the future backbone of the Ukrainian economy, then that certainly gives rise to optimism. I think the other thing I would just talk about is investment in skills. I think when we as Amazon look to invest in a territory, we look at the skill set in that country. So any of the efforts that ourselves through IT Skills for You in terms of cloud computing skills that we're delivering to Ukrainians both in Ukraine and outside Ukraine, but there are many, many other efforts ongoing in Ukraine that I think will certainly be helpful to making well-informed and comfortable business decisions when it comes to the future investments in Ukraine.
So, not speaking for the private sector, but a very important role that we play in our office is to be a listening and sounding board. We created, where I first met Andy, was the Ukrainian Partnership Forum in Washington, D.C., which was hosted by our partner, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We partnered with Department of Commerce as well as USAID and the State Department, and we brought together 250 both business, Ukrainian officials, U.S. agencies. And I think it's really important that we can say, oh, another conference, another talking session, but actually it's really important. It's really important that government listens to what the private sector needs, and we listen to how those needs evolve over time, given the status of war, where we are in recovery, and then also plugging into, as we say, these multilateral conferences. So the London Recovery Conference coming up in June. Our series will continue on, and we'll be offshooting other conferences around science and other sectors, human capital, workforce training. So that's all I'll say. I don't want to talk too much on that point. But the point is, I do think we need to keep these conversations going. And as we can tell by turnout here today, there is big interest in the private sector in making sure we move forward and we find those opportunities.
Mr. Krivonas, in your initial remarks, you also talked about staffing issues, the need to scale up your office and other authorities in Ukraine. Basically, do you think you're ready for a potential, if not likely, significant inflow of foreign investors, which will come with their own requirements that as we heard from Lucy, for rule of law and anti-corruption in Ukraine?
We're always ready. We're almost ready. We are ready. We have enough power, we have a good legislation we're ready, and we are waiting for investors, for recovery of Ukraine, for reconstruction of Ukraine. To protect investors also, and so on.
Very good. So we have about 10 minutes left. Time for the audience to weigh in. I have a swirling chair here, so we have a question right here in the front. Over here. Over there. 4. All right. We'll stick with the first 4.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Darina Onishko, European Democracy Youth Network, originally from Ukraine. It's a very interesting session that we just had. And yes, so of course we understand the challenges of rule of law in Ukraine, the concerns that potentially international community may have, and the private sector specifically. But to be honest, also in the EU, there are some of countries that don't have perfect indices about corruption or rule of law, right? So there's also a feeling that to some extent it's as well Russian narrative that Ukraine is so corrupt country. And my question is, what should change except the wonderful reforms that we just heard about to change this perception of Ukraine, this negative branding? Thank you.
We'll take the next question there.
Yulia Kozenkevich, also from Ukraine. I was really enjoying this topic, also because, you know, in Ukraine, especially in the western part, we were talking a lot about corruption, and we were talking a lot that we were trying our best to overcome it. But on the other hand, we are looking so much for investment to be possible to move with our economics issues and to go through the VAR. But on the other hand, we see how much experience we have from our partners as you, from the US and European Union. And I believe that my country also would like to become a good partner for you. And my question is how we can use experience of you, of our partners from USA, European Union, private sector, to be a great partners for you in a business in the future, for example, in 10 years, because we are speaking a lot right now about rebuilding in the next few years, but also in the long scale that also could be involved such young people as me, that in the one day we could also help you a lot. Thank you.
I don't know who wants to weigh in. Are we peddling a Russian narrative by focusing too much on Ukrainian corruption, not on corruption elsewhere in the West? And how can Ukraine become a great partner?
Well, I think I'll answer the second one. So, I mean, I think what's really important from the private sector perspective in answer to your question is we need to continue to listen. We need to continue to work out what it is that is required in Ukraine and then match where we can help and where we can't help. You know, so I talked earlier about, you know, Amazon leaning into its strengths. You know, we have over 100 SME sellers, Ukrainian SME sellers. In that instance, we listened to their concerns early last year, waived all of the fees that are required for them to sell on the Amazon stores. You know, so that's just a very small example of where I think the really important thing for companies is to continue to listen and then to continue to communicate and engage with government to work out where can we best assist with the rebuild.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, in terms of, as I said, sort of Russia wants to see a corrupt Ukraine, firstly, because that's the way they do business, and secondly, it's the perception they create that saying, you know, Ukraine's a corrupt country. I think from our side, we have our 3 Ps, prevent, publicize, and punish. And I think in terms of prevention, there's all kinds of prevention mechanisms being introduced. The Ministry of Digital Transformation, they're doing quite phenomenal things. I mean, you can't stuff an envelope full of cash into a computer. So it's you know, going digital. The publicizing, I think here in this room, the civil society, the investigative journalists, the media, the free media is extremely important. But it's the punishing. And I think, you know, what Semen, what the director of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, they're doing, you know, as the director said, you know, arresting the head of the Supreme Court with 2.7 million on his sofa. And I think, and now it's just showing the punishment.
The one last thing I'd say on the anti-corruption piece is that I think the transparency piece is so important, but as I said in my opening, important, just as we have the climate ambition, the green ambition in the energy sector, an opportunity to build back better, the same for the anti-corruption transparency issues as a model for the rest of the world, right? That there's an opportunity because corruption does exist in all over the world and in many of our governments, whether they're authoritarian or they're democratic. So I think that recognizing we're looking to actually create models for the rest of the world, this is a huge opportunity where we can build support around the world, not only for Ukraine, but for other democracies as well, and fighting authoritarianism. So I appreciate your point. It's very well taken.
So, Mr. Krivonas, do you have something to teach the rest of the EU on anti-corruption efforts?
Can you please repeat?
Yeah, sorry. No, I was going to ask, I mean, the initial question was, are we focused too much on corruption in Ukraine and not elsewhere in Europe or the West? So my question to you is, do you feel that you have something to learn? Do you have, something to teach the rest of the world, not least the donor countries, on this issue?
How? I think it's, if I correctly understand your question, we have to fight the corruption and together, and that's it. So, yeah,
Okay, we have a question down here in the front. Can we have a mic up?
Thank you. Isabel Nassar, Georgia Tech. My question relates to the notion of the cloud as the new trenches, which has been mentioned a few times. While the ability to maintain that data so quickly when necessary is no doubt a benefit, there are very clear cybersecurity concerns with consolidating such important government and bank data. As data privacy is such an integral part of European policy and Ukraine moves more towards integration, what is being done to ensure that this data is not compromised and that the government and especially the people are protected? Thank you.
We'll take the other question over here.
Hello, thank you for your remarks. My name is Shivani. I'm also from Georgia Tech. My question is in relation to private sector engagement and investment, particularly in relation to current systems in place to monitor and evaluate the utilization of investment and aid, particularly in relation to the progression of recovery and reconstruction related to sustainability and rule of law, and how that can be mobilized and institutionalized to increase private investment and cohesion.
Well, Lucy, I think the first question was probably mostly for you. So if you start with that, and then we can progress out.
Look,
you can be brief.
I'm going to be brief because it's a very brief answer. You know, we take security very, very seriously. Our colleagues at Amazon Web Services, that is, you know, the number one priority in terms of how it operates its service. And that's really where it is in terms of how we operate.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, we have a committee on data protection, and I think it's pivotal. I think everything that's been done around sort of cybersecurity, because the attacks are daily, but I think it is something and it is a priority. So,
anybody wishing to weigh in on the last question?
Yeah, I'll probably add. So, I mean, Shivanya, if we're looking at like where's the money going to come from? Yes. So we see 5 sources. Number 1, this will be the loans. Number 2, it'll be the loans. Then we'll have the grants. So the government's giving grants. We'll have the Ukrainian budgets, which at the moment is a big deficit. We'll have Russian assets, which may not happen tomorrow. I think it's a very complex issue, but I think that is something definitely on the table. And then it is the private sector. And I think, you know, the private sector, we believe that's going to be the majority of the money coming in through the private sector. And it is getting everything ready. I mean, we are already talking about, you know, things in terms of all sustainability. We're already talking about proper recycling, energy efficiency. I think the whole energy system, sort of moving away from moving towards de-oligarchization. So when the oligarchs controlled certain energy sectors, I think it's really opening it up, going green. I think, you know, we see already in terms of solar, wind, and other sort of energy sources. So I think this will be a massive recovery. This will be the biggest reconstruction of a country in Europe since World War II.
There's just as recently as I think 11 days ago, the G7s, all the development finance institutions came together to create the Ukrainian investment platform, which will provide an opportunity to give some organization around these financing opportunities, the tools of donor countries in terms of financing, like XM, like DFC. And so I think there's real opportunity there. Of course, you know, the scale of this is close to $1 trillion, perhaps, that we're talking about. So it will take an all-of-world effort, private, public coming together. And I think these opportunities to continue to come together, the multilateral opportunities, that's what we'll do, is we'll have to figure it out together and try to create opportunities around financing, because private sector can't do it alone. It will not, the assurances aren't there. It just will be difficult. So there is a government role here.
We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. I have one question here in the front. If there are any more, it is time to speak up or remain. We have one here as well. I think we will stick with that. Brief, please.
Thank you very much. Michał Baranowski, GMF Warsaw. I wanted to ask about the security assessment on the business side. This war is unlikely to end in a sort of clear line. I think we'll be in a gray zone for a while. We, of course, all hope for quick and decisive victory, but it might not happen this way. So how would we, what has to be I guess it's a question to you mainly, Sarah, but also to you from the American perspective, what has to be the security situation on the ground for businesses to be able to invest in a relatively, with a relatively right level of certainty? Thanks.
And then a final question over here. There's a mic behind you.
Thank you. I'm Sam Matheny, a former Marshall Fellow and currently with the National Association of Broadcasters. We've talked about roads, we've talked about bridges, we've talked about other forms of infrastructure, but I'm wondering if you could speak to the importance of rebuilding the communications infrastructure, especially in the context of trust, because so much of this conversation is about trust, and at least in the United States, the number one most trusted source of news is local television news. And I'm wondering about the broadcast infrastructure or other communications infrastructure and where that is seen, because that is so much of an anti-corruption campaign as well when you have that strong fourth estate. Thank you.
Well, maybe Mr. Krivonos, maybe you could weigh in on the last question. Politics, trust, anti-corruption, media is a key part. Is this a specific topic or a specific area of relevance for your office, a priority?
What kind of topic do you mean? Communication is important, yes.
Yeah, I mean the media sector. I mean, we all know that oligarchic control of media is a broader political problem. So is this a priority area for your office?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is one of our priorities. Also, yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would add, probably very briefly on the media. I think, over the last number of years, the media has been owned by the oligarchs. Mainly, or many, they weren't generating profits. I think it was a method to control the hearts and minds of the electorate. I think that's going to change. Free media, as I said, the publicizing is so important, building the trust. I think in terms of the question regarding the security, it's what we see today. I mean, we go to bed at night and the missiles are flying over. Luckily, the Ukrainian patriots together with American patriots are bringing them down and keeping the skies sort of safe. But I think we still see, and the message is that the companies are continuing to work even today. McDonald's have reopened 86 restaurants. McDonald's have reopened the restaurant in Bucha. So this is continuing across Ukraine. And I think it must be, the economy must go on, because if the economy stops, it's just that's so important to keep that economy running at the moment. And I think what the business community are doing is quite phenomenal, keeping their employees safe, but at the same time keeping the economy going during a full-scale war.
We're at our witching hour, but Lucy, Dorothy, any absolutely final brief words?
No, that was a good last word.
Yeah.